church here in the area of the Tri-Cities in Tennessee, after the name of St. John the Baptist. This is my first liturgy for me with you here, and also I like to congratulate you for acquiring this beautiful church. May the Lord bless the ministry here for the glory of His holy name. We are studying now the book of Ecclesiastes. Tonight we'll study chapter 2. To understand this book, you need to keep in mind what he wrote here. He wrote it, King Solomon. What he wrote it here, he wrote it without eternal perspective in his mind. What if there is no eternity? What if our life here is on earth only? So he is taking God and eternity out of the equation. That's why the conclusion is all vanity. In order to find meaning for the life, God and eternity must be present. Otherwise, you will not find any meaning in your life. So, while King Solomon declared in chapter 1 his intent to investigate the meaning of life, even revealing the conclusion of his search in chapter 1 verse 14, it is all vanity and grasping of the wind. But it is not until chapter 2 that King Solomon begins to give specific details about his imperative pursuit, what he did exactly in order to investigate the meaning of life. Solomon's report of his search covers 5 chapters in this book, from chapter 2 to chapter 6. Chapter 2 offers timeless lessons. What do you mean timeless? Beneficial in every time, about the search for meaning and fulfillment, which are relevant also in today's culture. It encourages us to reflect on our value and look beyond the fleeting pleasures and material positions in our pursuit for lasting satisfaction. We need to look beyond the fleeting pleasures and the material positions if you want to find a lasting satisfaction. This chapter is 26 verses, from verse 1 to 11, about physical pleasure. Can give you satisfaction or not? From 12 to 17, worldly wisdom, not the heavenly wisdom, worldly wisdom, can give you any satisfaction or not. And from 18 to 26, the repetitive labor, every day we work, can give you satisfaction or not. Verse 1, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you, I will test my heart, or I'll test myself with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure, but surely this also was vanity. So the chapter begins with King Solomon reflecting on a decision he made in his heart. He decided to indulge in mirth and pleasure in order to prove or test himself, to see if these things could bring him true and lasting happiness. His heart has been turned away from God by his pagan wives and concubines, So he decided to seek out wisdom the hard way, by trial and error. He tries something to see whether it brings happiness or not. So he started by trying the pursuit of pleasures for the sake of pleasure itself. Pleasure actually is a gift from God. But when we pursue pleasure for the sake of pleasure itself, it becomes sin and leads to addiction. But pleasure actually, we should pursue it in order to fulfill the economy of God and to be turned into thanksgiving. For example, food has pleasure. If you pursue it and indulge in food for the sake of pleasure, you will fall into the sin of gluttony. But if you pursue it because God gave us the food in order to survive, so you don't eat because of the pleasure, but you just eat to be healthy and to survive, and turn this into thanksgiving and gratitude to the Lord. But King Solomon here, he tried the pursuit of pleasure for the sake of pleasure itself. He said, I will test you, I will test myself with mirth, with those things which will cause mirth, joy, and pleasure, and try whether any happiness can be enjoyed this way, since it could not be in wisdom and knowledge, as he said in chapter 1. Again, wisdom and knowledge, he is not speaking about the knowledge of God or the heavenly wisdom. He's speaking about the earthly wisdom and the earthly knowledge. He tested the theory many live under today. Unfortunately, today, after hundreds of years from the experience of King Solomon, many people pursue pleasure for the sake of pleasure today. That the meaning of life is found in more and varied pleasure. People believe this. Believe that the meaning of life is found in more and varied pleasures, entertainment, and excitement. But what is the result? He said this also was vanity. And the preacher, Solomon, will shortly explain how he came to this conclusion, why he said it's vanity. But he tells us the result of the testing at the beginning, before he elaborates what he did. So, he failed, and this speaks volumes, given that he had access to anything and everything he could ever wanted. Why? He's a king. Power, money, everything he has. So the pursuit of pleasure and mirth can be seen as a distraction from the harsh realities of mortality. And the verse serves as a reminder that such pursuit ultimately lead to emptiness and a sense of vanity. That's why you hear about many people who had the money and power and pleasure, but at the end they commit suicide. There was nothing on earth that could bring his soul satisfaction, nothing, not even the greatest pleasure he could find. Then he tried amusement, entertainment, and laughter, yet these left him empty as well. That's why he said in verse 2, I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? Nothing. Both pleasure and laughter, for their own sake, were folly and vain. Pleasure, as I said, is a means, not a goal. When you make it a goal, it will become sinful. Solomon asked, "And of mirth, what does it accomplish? What does it affect toward real happiness and contentment? Nothing. How does it help to fill the void, to give lasting satisfaction?" The implied answer is nothing. At best, pursuing whatever appears to have potential for pleasing the senses produces only fleeting enjoyment, temporary enjoyment. So the verse challenges the reader to consider whether the pursuit of laughter and mirth is truly meaningful, and whether it ultimately brings lasting satisfaction. So, having proved the fruitlessness of some sort of sensual pleasure, he had another experiment. He reflects on his pursuits of pleasure, particularly through indulging in wine. Verse 3, "I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine." So he tried laughter and mirth. Now he's trying wine. "While guiding my heart with wisdom." So I will drink wine, but without losing my mind. "And how to lay hold of folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives." So I searched in my heart how. This indicates a personal and deliberate decision to seek fulfillment through wine. But he also was seeking to enlighten his heart with wisdom, suggesting a parallel pursuit of discernment and understanding. So he tried seeing how he could use wine to stimulate his body, but at the same time without totally incapacitating his mind. He wanted to understand how to limit folly and what good there was for man to do under heaven in their short lifetimes. That's why he said, "And how to lay hold on folly in order to put it away, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives." So the symbolism of wine represents again pleasure and indulgence, while wisdom symbolizes discernment and understanding. And the comparison of the two concepts reflects the tension between worldly pleasures and spiritual enlightenment. Because actually, indulging in wine is foolishness. So how you indulge in wine while at the same time you want to keep wisdom? Obviously, the wine did not help him any, and he had to move on to other things, to experiment other things. Verse 4, "I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards." So verse 4 reflects Solomon's recounting of his pursuit of pleasure and material possessions in attempt to find meaning and fulfillment of life. He tried laughter, he tried mirth, and now he tried wine, and now he's trying the material possessions. So the verse serves as a reflection of the human desire for accomplishment and the pursuit of of worldly pleasures. He said, I made my works great. This speaks to the numerous and impressive achievements that Solomon undertook during his reign. Definitely among these works, the temple, with all its wonderful structural preparations, but is not specially mentioned here, perhaps because no one could think of Solomon without connecting his name with this magnificent building. And it was excessive to call attention to it. Everyone knows the Temple of Solomon. Unfortunately, he mentions here that he did it all for himself, not for God. In addition to these great works, Solomon also indulged in creation of extravagant gardens and vineyards. As we read in verse 5, I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. These actions demonstrate his focus on material wealth and the pursuit of worldly pleasure. St. Didymus the blind has a nice comment here. He said, the real house is your good deed. That's what you build. So he said, if one wants to understand houses as good deeds, then every good deed is the house of its owner. When you do something good, then you build the house for yourself. Those who hear the word of Jesus and do them, build their foundation, their houses on a rock. So in verse 5, Solomon describes his effort to find satisfaction and pleasure by creating beautiful gardens, orchards, and planting various fruit trees. Solomon's emphasis on the garden, orchards, and fruit trees symbolizes his relentless pursuit of pleasure and sensory experiences. He was seeking to find happiness and fulfillment through the accumulation of material possessions and the enjoyment of physical pleasure. The garden, orchards, fruit trees can also be interpreted as symbols of human desires and the pursuit of worldly success. Verse 6, I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. In verse 6, King Solomon reflects on his own effort to create a beautiful and fruitful environment by constructing pools of water to irrigate and nourish the trees. On the surface, this verse may appear simply to describe a practical and agricultural endeavor. However, there are deeper layers of meaning and symbolism to be found within verse 6. For example, the construction of pools to water the trees can be seen as a metaphor for the human desire to control and manipulate the natural world, and by extension our own destinies. So he was not waiting for the rain to come or natural rivers, but he wanted to have artificial way to irrigate and water the trees. So in a symbol, how we try to manipulate the natural world for our own desires and our own destinies. And despite Solomon's effort to create a pleasant environment, he acknowledges the limitations of his own power and the inevitability of change and decay. So, regardless what we do, we are limited. And things one day will decay and change. So the verse also serves as a reminder that despite our best effort, true satisfaction and meaning are ultimately found in something greater than ourselves, only in God, in eternity. By acknowledging the limitations of his own abilities, King Solomon points us toward a deeper understanding of our place in the world and the need for humility and reverence in the face of the mysteries of existence. Verse 7, I acquired male and female servants, and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. Apparently, he acquired male and female servants to have sufficient workers for providing personal services to the entire royal household and maintaining the palace complex, parks, gardens, and other cultivated areas. Also, he had servants born in his house. They were the offspring of slaves in the king's service, and therefore they were slaves too. They were more recognized by their masters and showed a much closer attachment to the family than the bought slaves, because they were born in the house. And the enormous amount of Solomon's herd and flocks is proved by the extraordinary multitude of the sacrifices at the consecration of the temple. You will be impressed when you read 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 6-3, about the number of the sacrifices he offered at the consecration of the temple. And also the lavish provision made daily for the desires of his table. Again, it's beyond imagination what you read in 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 22 and 23, was prepared daily for his table. There was no desirable thing that he did not have. Also in verse 8, he spoke about the silver and gold. He said, I also gathered for myself silver and gold, and the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. So he recounts his acquisition of silver and gold, which were considered the most valuable and sought after possessions during his time. Additionally, he speaks of obtaining the special treasures of kings and of the provinces, indicating that he had access to the finest and most exclusive goods from various regions. Solomon also speaks of acquiring men and women singers, along with musical instruments and other delights of the sons of men. It's evident that Solomon spared no expense in seeking out every form of pleasure and entertainment available to him. Solomon's pursuit was fueled by his great wealth and power as the king of Israel, allowing him to indulge in every desire without limitation. But despite his vast wealth and access to every earthly delight, Solomon ultimately found these pursuits to be empty and unfulfilling. Verse 9. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. So commenting on his attainments, Solomon continued, so I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. This verse reveals the pride he felt in his accomplishments, as he asserted that he was great and excelled and had increased more than all who came before him in Jerusalem. He said, my wisdom remained with me. He did not lose the good judgment. The wisdom with which he had been gifted from God continued to be his position. Wisdom, sound judgment guided everything he undertook. Nothing that he desired was not tried out by him, as we read in verse 10. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. He indulged in everything that was available and enjoyed participating in them and doing them, and he found great delight in them. And he said, this was my reward from all my labor. He speaks of rejoicing in all his labor and consider this his portion, his reward for all his effort. But when he considered all that he had done and what he experienced and accomplished, he recognized within himself that it was all useless and empty, unsatisfying and meaningless, as he said in verse 11. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. It was searching for the undiscoverable and had no lasting value. It still left his heart empty and deeply dissatisfied. It was all chasing after the wind, a striving after what lacked any real substance. There was no advantage or profit or gain from anything under the sun. The works and toiling that Solomon has undertaken can be seen as representative of the broader human experience, the toil and effort that individuals employ in their pursuit of success and fulfillment. And the notion of vanity and grasping for the wind speaks to the disappointment and emptiness that often accompany the relentless quest for worldly accomplishment. St. Didymus the Blind says, a person who is enlightened by the sun of righteousness is not under the sun, but in the sun. Thus, it is said in the Gospel, the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father, not under the sun. If a person says about himself that he is a Christian and enlightened by the true light, by the sun of righteousness, and still concentrates his action on earthly things and strive after them, and we all are for the most part like these people, this person is still under the sun. You know, in Colossians chapter 3 verse 1, it says, if you were raised with Christ, set your mind on things above, not on things below. If he is under the sun in this way, he has no gain. Because what profits a man if he gained the whole world and lost his own soul? Even if he quotes much from Scripture, he memorizes Scripture, but does not act accordingly, he did not have a treasure in heaven, then he has no gain. St. Gregory of Nyssa says, people who write in water, if you try to write on the surface of the water, are engaged in drawing the shapes of the letter in the liquid by writing with the hand. So I write and I'm engaged in writing letters, but nothing remains of the shape of the letter. And the interest in the writing consists solely in the act of writing. So the pleasure I will get just in the act of the writing, but after I finish writing the letter, immediately I don't find it, because the water will remove it. For the surface of the water continually follows the hand, obliterating what's written. St. Gregory says, in the same way, all enjoyable interest and activity disappears with its accomplishment. When you accomplish, it's gone. When the activity ceases, the enjoyment also is wiped out, and nothing is stored up for the future, nor is any trace or remnant of happiness left to the pleasure takers when the pleasant activity passes away. You are doing something, you enjoying it, once you are done, it's gone. This is what the text means when it says there is no advantage under the sun for those who labor for such things whose end is futility. As I told you, from verse 1 to 11, he spoke about physical pleasures. From 12 to 17, about worldly wisdom. Verse 12, he knew physical pleasure is vanity. Then I turned at myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who succeeds the king? The successor of a king, can he do anything different than what the previous king did or what the previous ancestors did? He said they are repeating the same, only what he has already done. Whatever you will do is already done before you. So being disappointed in his pursuit of pleasure and not finding satisfaction and happiness in that, he turns from it and reassumes his study of natural wisdom and knowledge. Natural wisdom, not divine wisdom. Natural wisdom and knowledge. He's trying to make a new trial and see whether there might be something he had overlooked in his former inquiry. Maybe my former inquiry in chapter 1 about knowledge was wrong. And whether upon a revise of what he had looked into, he might not find more satisfaction than before. So the phrase, what can the man do who succeeds the king, suggests a sense of acceptance of the fact that no one can surpass the achievement of those who came before them, particularly the king. As king, he had special advantages not open to ordinary men. Yet as a king, with the resources of a king, he had tried everything out, had covered all the ground. He looked into everything. So what was any man, including himself, can do to follow that? All any man could do was to repeat the same old thing. No man expected to find more satisfaction in the world than Solomon did, nor to gain a greater insight into the principles of mortality. All of us, one day, we will die and leave this world. That's why, if there is no eternity, if there is no God, we will be the most miserable, as St. Paul said. So when a man has done what he can, still it is only what he has already done. So anything you will do, it's done before you by someone else. He recognized that there was wisdom and that there was folly. In verse 13, then I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. He recognized that the first was the wisdom, totally superior to the folly, just as light is superior to darkness. Verse 14, the wise man's eyes are in his head, meaning he sees his way. But the fool walks in darkness. Yet I myself perceive that the same event happened to them all. Sickness, illness, natural disaster, death happened to the wise and happened to the fool. So the wise man sees where he is going. He uses discernment and walks in the light. The fool stumbles in darkness with his eyes closed. But the same event happens to them all. Regardless of wisdom or folly, all people are subject to the same inevitable events in life, including death, suffering, and unforeseeable nature of the future. Verse 15. So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity. So verse 15 captures the observed crisis of Solomon as he contemplates the futility and vanity of earthly pursuits and human wisdom. The phrase, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me, portrays a sense of despair. It represents his realization that the same fate befalls both the foolish and the wise. Again, to understand this verse, no eternity, no God. What actually makes wise better than the foolish, as in the parable of the 10 virgins, the eternity and God. So he's saying, despite his wisdom and achievement, he is not exempt from the hardships and afflictions that come with living in a fallen world. He understands that the same fate befalls both the foolish and the wise. He struggles with the idea that his wisdom has not provided him with any lasting advantage or exemption from the struggles and uncertainties of life. Not because I am wise, then I will not get sick. Not because I'm wise, then I'm exempt from suffering from natural disasters. This contemplation echoes the sentiment and expressed in chapter 1, verse 18. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. He said, this also is vanity. he came to the conclusion that being wise was meaningless, empty, futile, and purposeless. Verse 16. For there is no more remembrance of the wise than of the fool forever, since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come. And how does a wise man die? As the fool. How many wise people lived from Adam until today? You can see billions. How many are remembered? Nothing. Very few. And the same for the foolish. That is the meaning of verse 16. So in verse 16, Solomon reflects on the irony that despite their wisdom, both wise and foolish individuals will ultimately be forgotten. In the eyes of the world, the wise and the fool are ultimately forgotten. This observation by Solomon again speaks to the fleeting nature of human existence and the brevity of earthly achievement and reputations. But if what he says here is true and all ends at the end of this life, what is there to live for? Again, yes, what he is saying is true only if there is no afterlife. That's why St. Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, if we have hope in Christ only in this life, we are the most miserable. St. Gregory, the wonder worker, says, he's saying now with eternity in perspective, no, a wise person and a foolish person have nothing in common if you take eternity in perspective. Either in terms of human remembrance, because God will remember them, their names are written in the book of life, or in terms of divine recompense. As for human works, the end already overtakes them all while they still seem at the beginning. But a wise person never shares the same fate as a stupid person. Verse 17. Therefore, I hated life, because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me, for all is vanity and grasping for the wind. So here the preacher confesses that as a result of his meditation, life was becoming hateful to him because of its pointlessness. All the effort he had put in discouraged him, even grieved him, because it had achieved nothing. It was profitless. Again, he summed it up as useless and striving after the unattainable. His sense of grievance reflects his dissatisfaction with the struggles and hardships that are an inevitable part of the human experience. Now he comes to the last part. We spoke about physical pleasure, vanity, and grasping of the wind. Wisdom and knowledge, earthly, again, vanity and grasping of the wind. Now he's speaking about repetitive labor. Verse 18. Then I hated all my labor, in which I had toiled under the sun. Why? Because I must leave it when I die to the man who will come after me. Another thing that troubled Solomon was that he would have to leave the result of all his great efforts to others. The verse begins with the declaration, I hated all my labor, indicating a strong sense of strong hate and dissatisfaction with the result of his effort. The word labor here refers not only to the physical work or toil, but also to the fruits of that labor, either the position, achievement, wealth that have been accumulated over time. And the word under sun is significant here because it reflects Solomon's perspective on life from a purely earthly and human standpoint. This is very important. Eternity is not in the equation here, nor God. St. Athanasius says, if the whole earth is not worth the kingdom of heaven, as we learn here from the book of Ecclesiastes, surely who has left a few fields leaves nothing, as it were. So if I left a few fields for God, I'm leaving nothing. Even if he has given up a house or much gold, he ought not to boast nor grow weary, because the whole world equal nothing. Moreover, we should consider that if we do not relinquish these things for virtue's sake, we leave them behind later when we die, and often, as Ecclesiastes reminds us, to those to whom we do not wish to leave them. So if I don't actually leave these things for virtue's sake or for God's sake, I will leave them to others who may actually waste them. Why then do we not relinquish them for the sake of virtue, so that we may inherit a kingdom? Verse 19. He said in verse 18, I must leave it to the man who will come after me. Then verse 19. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? The man comes after me. Yet he will rule over all my labor, in which I toil, and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is valid. By the way, Rehoboam, who came after King Solomon, was not wise, and the kingdom was divided. So verse 19 begins with a rhetorical question. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? This question highlights the unpredictability and uncertainty of life. What men build up, other men may pull down. So all his great efforts would finally have been in vain. What his wisdom had produced would eventually come to nothing. It would be dismissed by the next generation. So the symbolism in verse 19 lies in the contrast between wisdom and folly, and the ultimate insignificance of both in face of mortality and the journey of time. The wise will die, and he will leave his inheritance to others who may waste it, and the same happened for the foolish. Verse 20. Therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. After serious reflection, Solomon gave up his heart, his inmost self or his mind, to despair over all that he had built up through his frustrating laboring under the sun. He felt downcast in spirit because all the exhausting laboring had produced nothing of enduring value. Despite his own unparalleled wisdom and understanding of the world, Solomon comes to view this pursuit as ultimately meaningless. Yes, he was very wise, but what he left, his son actually wasted. So the verse highlights the frustration of toiling to gain wisdom and knowledge, only to have it be inherited by someone who did not work for it. Again, Solomon is considering the ultimate value of human labor and toil in the context of the world under the sun, only under the sun. Or in other words, the temporal and material world in which we live. Verse 21. For there is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill. Yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. So he concludes by asking, what point there is for a person to wear himself down and exert painful effort, seeking to build up for the future, when the future is so insecure and transient? The pursuit of wealth, success, and pleasure ultimately leads to sorrow and grief, and these pursuits do not provide the lasting fulfillment that they promise. That's why in verse 22 he asks this question: for what has man for all his labor, and for the striving of his heart with which he has toiled under the sun? Nothing. Verse 23, for all his days are sorrowful, and his work burdensome. Even in the night when he goes to sleep, his heart takes no rest. Then he leaves all of this to someone who will waste it. This also is vanity. Verse 23 speaks out of the experience of the men who labor for that which does not profit. Even in the night, his heart takes no rest, suggests that even in the quiet moment of solitude, the individual finds no peace or contentment. Worldly pursuits do not bring lasting satisfaction or peace of mind. It's further evidence of the temporary nature of things, of the meaninglessness of it all. Then in verse 24, now he will mention God for the first time. He said, nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. So he said, you are working, there is a pleasure God gave you, enjoy it, turn it into thanksgiving, and that's it. And what you are doing here, you will reap it in the eternal life. So the conclusion in these last verses, Solomon brings God into the equation as a solution for the first time. That's the solution. Now he recognizes the problem. What's the problem? The man is so busy with the things that God has given to men that he has no time for God himself. All these are gifts from God, but we are so busy with them and we forgot God, the giver of all gifts. So he encourages his audience to find satisfaction in the simple pleasures of world, and to acknowledge that these pleasures come as a gift from the hand of God. It is a divine gift, for God has awarded human with the capacity to work and to enjoy what can be obtained through hard labor. Verse 25. For who can eat or who can have enjoyment more than I? So it is me. So verse 25 emphasizes Solomon's distinguished position, questioning who could possibly enjoy life more than him with all his achievement and possessions. His life should be the best in a meaningless world. So I should enjoy all of this and turn it into thanksgiving. But despite his wealth and power, he is still unfulfilled and dissatisfied if he looked at all what he has away from eternity and away from God. Verse 26. For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight, as the sight of God. But to the sinner, he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give to him who is good before God. This also a vanity and grasping for the wind. So verse 26 begins by asserting that God grants wisdom, knowledge, and joy to those whom God finds favorable. This statement emphasizes the sovereignty of God in bestowing blessing upon individuals. It suggests that those who live in accordance with God's will are rewarded with a spiritual gift that enrich their lives. The only true wisdom, which is not grief, the only true knowledge, which is not sorrow, and the only joy in life are the gifts of God to those he regards as good, to those whom God regards as good. The verse also addresses the fate of sinners. It states that sinners are given the task of laboring and accumulating wealth, only to see it transferred to the righteous. So they accumulate and gather in order to be given to the righteous. This notion challenges the idea of worldly success bringing lasting fulfillment. It presents a contrast between the fleeting nature of material wealth and the enduring value of spiritual wisdom. This idea also, we can find it in Proverbs chapter 28, verse 8. One who increases his position by usury and extortion gathers it for him who will pity the poor. So a person who will actually gather a lot of wealth by ungodly ways, this wealth will be transferred to a charitable man who will have pity on the poor. The same in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of a sinner is stored up for the righteous. In the parable of the talents, the talent of the unprofitable servant, the one talent, is given unto him who had made best use of his money. So Solomon concludes that it is by pleasing God in this way that man reveals true wisdom, knowledge, and joy, and not by his struggle to attain the unattainable. So in verse 26 he said, God will give wisdom, joy, and knowledge to the righteous. The sinner, he will gather and collect to be given to the righteous. For the sinner, this also is vanity and grasping for the wind. As the word of the Lord Jesus Christ himself, when he warned his disciples against being so anxious about obtaining the things of this life that fail to trust in God. When he told them in the Sermon on the Mountain, don't worry about what we eat, what we drink, all these things. Actually, you need to trust God. He provides for the lilies of the field. He provides for the birds of heaven. So, Men were to receive from God's hand what God gave and were to look for the blessing that's from above by seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. So the idea of pleasing God here is on the basis of living a normal life before Him without self-seeking, but which is the result of an unstressed heart, which is open to receive God's wisdom, knowledge, and joy, and seeks to please God, while exerting sufficient honest effort in his toil to make it possible. To such a man, he says, God gives such wisdom, knowledge, and joy, that's to say, the equivalent of what Solomon had been looking for in all his effort, but had failed to find. This also is vanity. It points to the striving after pleasure in and from labor. So, if you strive to get pleasure from your labor, it's vanity. Pleasure only in pleasing God. It is anything that is not done under God. It's vanity. God is the one who gives our life meaning. However, some commentators say that it is not only applied to the work of sinner. So vanity and grasping of wind apply to the sinner. But even the best gift of God, wisdom, knowledge, and joy, so far as they are given in this life, are not permanent and are not always, but are effective for the purpose for which they appear to be given. So God gives us here wisdom, knowledge, and joy on earth to use them in order to prepare ourselves for the eternity. That's why if we take eternity and God out of the equation, it will be also vanity and grasping of the wind. This concludes chapter 2 from the book of Ecclesiastes. Glory be to God forever and ever. Amen.
Alleluia, Sabbath ke agium ne mati ke nikai ke sosion asonion